Hey everyone, welcome. It's Darren. Today we're going to talk about data audits. Data audits are what you do to ensure that your data actually comes into your system correctly. Once it gets to the system correctly, make sure that you're processing it right, and then also make sure that you're outputting the results correctly. And a key part of data audits is actually checking every single step of the process. And this really needs to be done everywhere, to some degree at least. Some places it's more critical than others. My Had a previous job with a medical insurance company, and there we had audits all the time. We had clients that would audit the data for their employees. We had national credentialing companies would come in and audit to make sure that we're doing everything correctly per our policy, per laws, per client contracts, etc. And chances are, wherever you're looking at data, you're going to have to do some of that. Now, when you're trying to figure out the exact details of exactly how you build an audit, you have to really know what the process is. And that tends to be pretty specific to an industry, uh, and often even pretty specific to a company. So, as our example, we're actually going to look at election ballot audits. And that's because everybody kind of has some understanding of them. Before we go on, let's take a look at what actually isn't actually an audit. Uh, Things that are commonly called audits, IRS tax audits, for example. If you're outside the US, the IRS is the government agency at the federal level that tracks income taxes. Uh, IRS tax audits, when they're prompted because of something on your tax return, that's not an audit. That's investigating a potential error. They do some audits that are random audits, and those would be a form of an audit. Election audits. And those are often not audits either. Election audits are often recounts, which aren't really an audit. An audit is something that's done to prevent errors. It's something that's done to see if there are errors. It's not something that's done because you think there's an error and you're trying to fix it. So, what really is an audit? Well, as I mentioned, it's a validation of your data. You validate data at every single stage of the process to verify that your results are actually real, quite simply. They're not because of a specific error or an issue or a condition. And an audit should really be a fairly routine process. And whether you do this, you do this level of audit once a month, this level of audit once a year, this level of audit every 5 years, whatever it is, an audit should really be a routine process. It's not something to be afraid of. And you should emphasize that to whoever's data you're auditing. You should emphasize this isn't something to be afraid of. It's just something so that everyone knows, hey, our data's good here. So what do you audit? Well, generally they're tied to some specific data in a specific industry. Uh, in that company that I worked for, as I mentioned, we would audit authorizations and claims payments and uh, all kinds of stuff like that. If you are working in, uh, say, a manufacturing environment, there you might audit percent failure rate for parts, for example, uh, quality control measures. That's typically an audit. Uh, so, what do you audit? Well, 100% of data is ideal. You can't always do it, but 100% is ideal. Uh, Your other option, if 100% is either not feasible or just not realistic, is to do a fixed percentage of your data, and that's typically a fairly small percentage. If you're pulling samples to do quality control on items, you may pull 1% or half a percent or a very small sample from each batch or from each day's work, for example, and do your audit there. Uh, you can also do it for all or a percentage of data which only meets certain conditions. Oh, that's not so common for an audit. Sometimes it does work. For example, if you have unusual claims, you might want to audit 100% of unusual claims. or if you have things that are particularly expensive. Uh, if you have, is it worth auditing a bunch of 50 and $100 charges when you have $100,000 and $1 million charges out there, or is it really just audit that big stuff because that's all that you really care that much about? And if you find errors there, then you may have to go somewhere else. But again, remember, it's not to address a specific problem. If you're auditing only charges over $1 million, it's not because you think all charges over a million are fraudulent. It's because the charges over $1 million are worth auditing, and the charges for a buck and a quarter, they're not worth your time. Okay, so what factors you need to consider? Well, first factor is you really need to validate your data at every single level of the process. From the data collection, the data entry, the processing, the output, every stage you want to make sure that you're auditing every one of those levels because you can have errors sneak in anywhere. The audits can be different for each level, but somehow you need to process a validation system for every level through the system. You really want to automate as much of this as possible. You don't want to have to sit there and manually do everything by hand. If you have 500 claims processors processing claims, you don't want to have then have 500 auditors going through those 500 claims to make sure that the data makes sense. You want to automate that to the greatest degree possible. You also want to focus your audits on places that are more prone to having problems. Data input tends to have problems, whether you're typing it in, which is very prone to error, or optical scanning has errors, for example. Uh, any kind of input process. The processing steps, once you've validated those, you probably don't need to validate them as often unless you make changes to them. Uh, so manual audits as you go through should also be conducted by people who don't have a vested interest in the results. And that's kind of important. You don't want to have your the manager of a group should not be auditing their own group, for example, especially if that manager's bonus package is tied to the results of the audit. You need to separate the audit from the people who are actually responsible for uh, doing the work, and ideally separate the work so that the auditors aren't necessarily even compensated by error. You want an accurate audit, and if it finds errors, that's fine. You don't want to pay them to find errors necessarily. Another thing with an audit is you always want to establish an acceptable level of errors in advance because you will have errors. If you have people typing in data, for example, you're not going to get 100% accuracy. You might decide, okay, I'm willing to accept a 99% accuracy rate or a 96% accuracy rate or something. Decide in advance what's your accuracy, and that accuracy can be different at every level. Finally, although this is really sort of getting back to just combining some of the earlier stuff, you need to establish what the correcting and validating procedures are at each level in advance. You can't do an audit and then figure out what to do about it necessarily. If you have errors, you want to know what you're going to do. If you find an error, what are you going to do about it before you actually go do the audit and potentially find the errors? Okay, so I mentioned we're going to look at uh, US election ballots. And the reason is a lot of my viewers are in the US, where we're pretty familiar with elections. These are run differently state by state, sometimes county or parish, but each run different processes as well. So outside of the US, voting is run very differently as well. So we're just going to do a really quick summary of how it works. So in the US, when you go in on election day, your ballot will have a lot of stuff on it. I live in Michigan. We will typically have we have a major election every 2 years here. Presidential elections are every 4 years. governor elections every 4 years on the alternate 2 years. So every 2 years, we'll be electing either a governor or a president. Every 2 years, we elect a U.S. House of Representatives representative in every district nationwide. Uh, Twice every 6 years, it sounds weird, but it's twice every 6 years you elect a U.S. senator statewide in every state. Uh, and those rotate, so it's not always the same. You have county positions, a bunch of them. You'll have township positions, local city positions. You have school boards, you have library boards. Uh, you've got everything. So you may have the president of the United States and the county dog catcher literally on the same ballot. Uh, and this means the ballots can be long. You might have 50, 100, 150 different options on a single ballot when you go into an election. So it's not just go vote for who you want for president. There's a lot there. Uh, so there's some rules on how to vote. We'll get to those in a minute. A contentious issue in the US right now is voter validation. We're not going to talk about voter validation. That's not really data as such. So we're going to talk about the physical ballots themselves from the time the voter casts the ballot, however they do it, from the time the voter casts the ballot until the time that the results are officially validated and announced. That's the part we're going to talk about today. Okay, so in the U.S. right now, voters can either cast their ballot on a piece of paper or on an electronic touchscreen tablet. The paper ballots are kept and allow for good validation at this level. The With a paper ballot, which is what we have here in Michigan, you get this long piece of paper. If you've seen the old Scantron sheets, we did the standardized test, fill in the circles. That's what our ballots here look like. Uh, so you complete the ballot. It's one or two sides, might be fairly long, and you complete this ballot, and then you look at the ballot. Okay, so the first level of validation happens when you, the voter, fill this out and you look at your piece of paper in front of you and say, yep, that's who I want. That's who I voted for. If you look at it and say, oh, I marked the wrong circle, and that happened to me once, it happens to everybody, uh, then that ballot failed validation from the voter. And that's how to look at it, is it actually failed validation. And the process is that you just take it back up to the table and you say, oh, I screwed this up. And they do what's called spoiling the ballot, which invalidates that ballot paper, and they give you a different one. And then you take the different one and you correct it and you validate it again. Is this correct? Yep. Okay, good. So I know that the way I want to vote is the way it's on my piece of paper. Now, what if you don't have a piece of paper? What if you have a touch screen? That complicates it. Uh, I can't look at the piece of paper. In fact, not having the piece of paper will complicate it all the way through. But on the touch screen, you can look at the screen and it should show you the same thing. Okay, now we go on to step number two. So, step number two, you have your piece of paper, and this doesn't apply if you have touch screen. You'll actually skip this step. You have your piece of paper, and you walk over to a what's called a tabulating machine. It's just a scanner, and you feed the piece of paper, the ballot, into the tabulating machine, and it scans it and does some basic checks to it. And if it accepts it, it drops it down into a locked box below. If it doesn't accept it, it spits it back out. Now, what can it check for? Well, it checks to make sure it's a real ballot, for one thing. But then there's a couple of technical terms, which are fairly simple, on the ballot. You have things that are called undervotes and overvotes. So, again, this is not universally the case, but in the US, for example, and here, I can vote for one person for president. I can't vote for two. I can't vote for three. I can't vote for four. I only get one vote. So if there's five candidates for president, I can mark one, that's valid. I can mark zero, that's valid. That's called an undervote. Um, I can't mark two or more. Ideally, if you have an overvote, the tabulator would then reject it because that means it's an invalid ballot. If you have an undervote, so if I don't vote for president, for example, I should get a warning. And currently, on the machines that we have, we don't, but they should warn me. And undervotes are actually more common than you might think, whereas I have one president that I can vote for. If you look at something like the local school board, uh, there I might vote for, say, up to six candidates, which means I can vote for zero, one, two, three, four, five, or six. I can't vote for seven. There might be 20 people on the ballot. So there, you can vote for more than one, you can vote for up to six. Over that is an overvote. In the event of an overvote, that whole, not the whole ballot, but that whole race is now considered to be invalid. So if you vote for two people for president, or if it's scanned as two people for president, your presidential vote doesn't count. If you vote for seven people for the school board, it doesn't take the first six. It invalidates that for your entire ballot. The rest of your ballot's still good. Undervotes, like I said, are legal. Uh, Ideally, it would generate a error message. So how do you improve the scanning of the ballot process? Well, so I walk over and I scan it. So I already know I looked at my piece of paper. I know that my piece of paper was right. I stuck my piece of paper into the scanner and it's going to scan it. It's going to make sure it's a real ballot, first of all. Assuming it's a real ballot, it's going to make sure that I have no overvotes. If I have overvotes, it's going to reject it because that's an invalid ballot and almost certainly something that was a mistake on my part. If I have undervotes, it's going to give me a warning because it's legal, it's valid, but it may or may not be what I wanted. So to validate everything was scanned properly. Remember, I verified it was on the piece of paper correctly. Our next level validation comes in here. It needs to verify it's scanned properly. It spits it out after it determines is it a valid ballot? Are there undervotes? Are there overvotes? It then prints out a piece of paper with all of my choices on it. And it'll tag anything that's an undervote or an overvote. If there's a overvote, it just rejects the ballot and I can walk out with it right then. If it's undervotes, it holds on to it. And I look at this piece of paper and I look through it and say, okay, yep, yep, yep. Oh, undervote? Yeah, that's right. That's fine. Okay, yep, yep, yep. And everything's good. I should hit a big green button that says accept. It drops it in the box and adds it. If I say, wait, that's not how I marked that, then I hit the big red reject button and it spits my ballot out and I go back and get another one and fix the ballot. That's how it should work. It doesn't today, but that's how you would validate the scanning part. Now, the voter has validated what they marked on the paper is what they wanted. They've validated that the way it's scanned is correct. So now we know that those two levels are both validated at a 100% level. And again, you can't do that. And this is one of the big problems with the touchscreen voting. You can't do it that way. There is, on some touchscreens, they actually have a paper printout and they will actually print out what you picked, but you still don't have the original paper ballot. And the paper is basically also to verify at this level of data audit. Okay, so at the end of the day, everyone's voted. You've got every ballot that's been fed in the machine was verified that it read it correctly according to the user. So at the end of the day, right now the election officials send the results off to the state capitol, and they're all tabulated up, and the results are put out. It's not ideal. You're missing a few steps here. So you just send them off to the state. You don't know that they're really correct. You don't know it added anything correctly, and you don't know that it's transmitting correctly. So all you validate is up to the point of scanning. So now we have to validate that it's actually correct. And to do that, do the same, start off just the same. At the end of the day, the election officials punch in some code or turn a key or whatever on the machine, and it should print out the total votes for the ballot and give you some kind of a code on it. So the machine will print out all of your totals. It should give you its own machine number, the date and the time, and then it should also give you another machine number that's at your location. So typically, unless you're a really small town, you may only have one tabulator. Typically, you'll have a lot. I live in a fairly small town, and we have eight, I think, here that are used. I think we have eight separate local precincts, so each one has to have a separate tabulator. So it gives you another number. So I am standing at machine one. I tell it to close out for the day. It prints out the totals. And at the bottom of it says, okay, do an audit with machine seven. So I take this piece of paper, I take all of my results, and I go over to machine number seven. Now, since it printed my total, it sent that to the state already. I go to machine number seven, and I feed this the sheet that it printed up, which machine number seven recognizes. Hey, I'm going into audit mode now, and here's the audit machine information. And I refeed every ballot through the machine. Just takes a couple minutes. They feed really quick. And we already know that all the ballots are scannable because they already scanned. So then the audit machine also gives me a total sheet and sends it off to the state right away. So now I have the original totals and I have the audit totals from the same stack, but from two different machines. I've just verified that these machines are both counting the same way, so I don't have a single machine failure. Now I have two people, at least, two election officials, go through and compare the sheets. By having at least two people, you make sure that you don't have one person just overlook it, and make sure you don't have any particular biases. If the totals compare and everything matches up, then you sign those total sheets and you either fax them or send them by or take photographs and email them something, somehow get a visual image up to the state. If they disagree, now you need to figure out why there's a discrepancy. Uh, you could have a discrepancy, for example, if one is if one machine is scanning incorrectly, or if they're running different total programs or something. And you'll have to develop a process for determining what that is, and that's beyond the scope of this video. That falls into that like industry specific stuff. Okay, so once you've got everything's in agreement, you've scanned everything, you've totaled it up on your original machine, you've validated on the audit machine, you've done that with every machine, you've sent the images off to the state. Great, everyone goes home for the night. You're done. Okay, so you verified the machines are counting the same. You haven't validated their counting correctly, you've validated their counting the same. Okay, now we have the next level. We have to validate that they're actually counting correctly. So the morning after the election, the state generates a random number for the machines. Um, how many machines do you want to hand count? You don't want to do 100%. There's no reason to do 100%. Maybe you're doing 1 in 20, 1 in 50, 1 in 100. Uh, you pick a number uh, and you decide that's going to be the machine number that we're auditing. So let's say we're doing 1 in 100. And we would then just use the last two digits of the machine number, serial number, whatever. Statewide, if you pick 47, any machine ending in a 47, those ballots are going to be hand counted. If you do 1 in 20, just use a modulo operation. So, again, same process. And you say, okay, here's the machines. If your serial numbers end in this, you hand count that machine. And you just pick one or two numbers. Don't need many. Okay, and then you also generate a second random number, and that's the ballot line. Let's do ballot line 45. Okay, so the 45th line on the ballot you're going to count because you don't want to count the whole thing. Remember, I said you could have 100 or more uh, boxes here to audit. That takes a long time to audit all of those on every ballot. So you're picking a random. So here we're not doing 100% again, we're just picking a random one. Now, once you've picked your machine numbers and you've picked your line numbers, and maybe do a couple of lines, but you don't do the whole ballot, obviously. Uh, you send this out to all the election officials, and the day after the election, they go and they check their machine numbers. If they have one of those machines or more, they pull that stack of physical printed ballots out. And now they go through the top race on the ballot, because the ballots are typically ordered. So the top race is the big race. Here in Michigan, that's the president or the governor, depending on the election. And they'll go through and they'll recount by hand on that one machine only all of the votes on that top race. And then they'll also go down to line 47 or whatever number we picked. And they'll count the number of line 47 votes, whatever 47 is. Not even the whole race. If this is for library board and there's 15 people and maybe line number 47 is the third person for the library board. They just count that one, how many votes there were for that one person. And you have at least three people do it. Again, that's to make sure you don't have any individual bias issues. They need to agree on it as they're going because hand votes are notoriously inaccurate. So if you have three people looking at every single ballot as it goes by and agreeing as you're going, now fortunately, this isn't going to take very long. The hand counts take forever, typically, but if you're only going through for one machine might only have a few hundred ballots in it. So you're not counting, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of ballots. You have each set of local election officials is going through a stack of a few hundred ballots, and they're not counting all of it. They're going through a few hundred ballots. They're marking, who was selected for president, and this fifth person down here for library board, and that's all they have to count. So they're going to be able to go through this pretty quick. They're going to get through it that day, certainly, probably before lunch. Okay, so when they're done counting, they then look at their piece of paper, and it should match. And they then send that up to the state that what their totals are. If they don't match, then they need to go look at why it is, and it's probably going to be pretty obvious because you're looking at a small number. You're probably only going to be off by one or two, and it's probably things like smudges on the paper, for example, that you can easily identify where the problem was. Hopefully, that got picked up when the ballot itself was scanned, and that doesn't happen. But if you have a problem, it's likely something simple. And a lot of times with audits, it really is something simple. So everything matches, you send it off to the state, and now you know your the data on the piece of paper is what the voter wanted. The machine read it the way it was on the piece of paper. The machine we know counted correctly, and that's been validated at 100% level. And the totals, the machines counted not only matching, but they actually counted up correctly as well. So now where do we go? Okay, so next step is state totals. The morning after the election, the state computer has been getting all this stuff from all the local election districts, and it's got everything added up. And it also has big stack of paper of stuff that was faxed or emailed or whatever of the images of these total and audit sheets that were sent in. Now what you want to have is take multiple copies of these images and multiple different people and sit down with Excel and just type in these results from each of the total sheets. Why do you have multiple people? Again, this is a error-prone process. It's also a process which is potentially subject to bias. You have at least three different people doing it, you pretty much eliminate that bias, or at least greatly reduce the risk of it. Once they're all typed into their Excel sheets, now you have at least three people sit down and you compare those three sheets and just go through it and verify, yep, these all match. Okay, so now we know that we've also validated that the state computer added correctly, because otherwise, yeah, we knew the stuff was getting to the state computer correctly, but now we've verified the state actually got it and processed it right and added everything up right. So if everything matches, you're done. That's the state process. As long as they also matched up with the manual counts. You've got 100% validation for most of the steps here. You've got enough of a random validation just at that one step for that second line. You're not manually counting every line. Uh, but at this point, you've got your official result and you've validated everything and you're sure everything does in fact match. So is this a painless audit? No, quite simply, it's not. Uh, but it's not too bad when you think about it. You have everything coming up to election day. You have people working the day after election day, but not too much. They're not putting in huge days on the day after the election. Most of the work has been automated. Most of the work was done through the scanners and through the computers and the programming on the scanners to generate the audit sheets and the total sheets and everything. Uh, you did do a hand count. You did hand counts statewide. Every district probably did hand counts, but they were only counting one race plus one line on a few hundred ballots. So it's not like some of the hand counts that we've seen on TV where, okay, we're going to do an audit, a full recount for, uh, what was it, Dade County, Florida with Miami, uh, where we have, 15 million ballots were cast and we're doing a full recount, full hand count on that, and it just takes forever. We're not doing any of that. We're counting 100, 200, 300 ballots and a couple of items on them. Uh, so that's easy enough to do the day after the election. There's manual data entry being done at the state level because you have to type in the number off of these total sheets and validate that those add up. But again, you're looking at not that many really. You have an initial unaudited results are available election night, and the final audited results should be available a day or two later. So really, not too bad as audits go. So, and again, this is one example. And there's also other ways of doing the same thing coming into this audit. And I mentioned the touch screen. Let's go back to that just real briefly. If you do the touch screen, what parts of this are you missing? Well, the voter can look on the touch screen and see, yes, this is how I really voted. That does still work. So that part's fine. The voter can't verify that the computer got it quite right exactly the same way unless there's a printout. If there's a printout, they can. There is no way at all to validate that the way the voter voted is actually the way the computer computed it during an audit. There are other ways to do that. There's no way to do it during an actual audit. Uh, in the form of audit that we've discussed, there's no way to go back and do a hand recount. Uh, or for that matter, there's no point to do a machine recount. And you also can't pick up the ballots and feed it to a second machine to make sure that you don't have a machine error. So there's a lot that you miss if you do touchscreen. That if you, as long as you have that piece of paper. Now, having the piece of paper doesn't mean you're doing a hand count. Hand counts are, as I said, notoriously inaccurate, huge time sinks. They just take forever to go through them. Lots of mistakes get made. And that's why a lot of the recount rules exist that we have today, is to manage those. Okay, so in summary, though, um, audits are really essential to validate your data. If you're working with data, if you care about your data, make sure the audit's correct. You want to validate as close to the source as possible. You want to validate every process at every level and automate it as much as possible. You want to decide how you're going to handle discrepancies in advance. and auditors should not be vested in the results. And finally, you want to streamline the process to minimize the work because this is something you should be doing regularly. Uh, Fortunately, this is something a lot of us actually do a lot and don't see it and don't think of it as an audit. Think of the last time you bought something online. So you go to Amazon and you pick 5 items, you put them in your shopping cart, and you go to buy them. Okay, what happens? You hit the cart icon, and it brings up your list of 5 items. It's asking you to verify, is this really what you want? Um, yep, looks right. Okay, and now you hit checkout, and it brings up your list of 5 items and puts the payment stuff on there. It's like, yep, still looks right. Putting your payment and shipping stuff, and hit submit, and brings up your list of 5 items and says, okay, last chance. Oh, wait, I didn't want that one. You just hit back and go back. So that's just an audit. So we see them all the time, and they're nothing to be terribly afraid of. We just have to get through them. And if they're well designed, they're non-invasive, they're quick, they're painless, they're accurate, and they catch virtually every error that you have. Okay, so one last thing before you go. I do need your help to keep the channel going. Uh, Best way to help is to help bring some more people in. And you can do that by liking the video, subscribe and hit notify. The absolute best way to help is to comment on the video. That tells the algorithms that YouTube this is worth watching. And finally, if you could help out over at Patreon, I have a Patreon channel at patreon.com/data analysis excellence. Memberships start are just a few bucks a month over there, and that would also really help out as well. Anyway, hope you learned something from the video. Hope you come back for more of them. I'll see you then.